Welcome to this second part of the weather app. In the first section we did the user interface, and all the data so far is static data. We're not using live data, so in this section we are going to do the JavaScript functionality, in which we are going to request weather data from a weather website that provides an API for developers to use the service and render that information into an application. In this particular scenario, I'm going to use Open Weather Map. They have an API. There are many weather websites out there that provide this service. You might have to do a search and find the one that suits your need, but usually they have some sort of documentation that describes how the API works. For example, if I click on how to use API, they have a sample here. They also let me know that I need to register and obtain a key, an API key, so I can issue requests to their services. Also, if I click on well, by the way, what is an API? According to, by the way, this I do not take credit for this diagram. I found it on Google, but I think it's a simple representation of what an API is. So an API, as you can see, we have a server on this side, and we have a client on this side. And so basically, the server, as a way to offer a specific service, uses an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. And so developers can use that service, that API, to request data and use it inside their application. Usually they're called RESTfulAPI because RESTful stands for representational state transfer, I believe. And basically you do that request using an HTTP request. That's what is known as stateless. It's not HTTP is not a state protocol in the sense that it's maintained for both. The connection is not constantly maintained for both the client and the server. It's just on a request as needed basis. And so you do an API request, and the server delivers the response, usually in the form of a Json object. And this is what it looks like. As you can see, this is a Json object, which stands for JavaScript object notation, which is in the form of key value pair. And so this is what we have to obtain the information that we're looking for. This is from openweathermap.org, and this is the information that we need. And if you look at the URL at the top, notice that we pass in inside the URL, we pass in different parameters, like for example latitude. The parameters are separated by this and symbol, longitude, and finally the app ID. And so we get this information. We get coordinates, which is it's an object within the object that has two properties of longitude and latitude. We have another one. This one is weather, and we have several. We have description, and so this is what we're going to use in our application. I hope I was able to explain it in a very simple yet in a way that makes sense. So let's get back to our application, and I'm going to open Sublime. And next I'm going to head over my terminal. I think I'm inside the weathers project. I'm going to do an ls. I'm going to create a directory called JS for JavaScript, and I'm going to create a file inside that directory called weather .js, and that is going to be my JavaScript file. So I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to open that file in Sublime. I'm going to go there. There we go. And I'm going to drag it into Sublime. So next I'm going to start my JavaScript. So I'm going to say window on load equals function. So everything inside this function is going to be done when the window loads, when we open the page. And so I'm going to create a few variables. So I'm going to create one variable that is called IP URL, and I'm going to let you know what we need this IP URL. The first thing that we need to do is to get, before we make a request to Open Weather Map API, we need to get the location of the user. In other words, when the user opens the weather app, before we can let them know what's the weather in their particular area, we need to know what's the user location. So there are a few ways to do that. HTML5 provides a way that we can do that, but I'm going to use a different route. I'm going to use an API service, an API that is from a website that is ipinfo.io, and they offer an API which is /Json, and that'll give you the IP address as well as the city, region, country, location, latitude and longitude, among other good information. And so I'm going to use this. I'm going to actually, in my application, I'm going to make two API calls. This is the first API call that I'm going to make, and from this one I'm going to get the location, and then I'm going to use this information to obtain the weather API, or the weather information. So I already have the URL, which is https //ipinfo.io /JSON, and I'm going to create another variable which is called app_id, and this one is going to be for the Open Weather Map API. Notice that this API requires an app ID, which I'm going to use. I'm going to copy it from here, and I'm going to paste it right here. And next I'm going to create another variable called location, and I'm going to, if I do an inspect, actually I think I can get it from here. Let me open it back again. I'm looking for my index.html page. There we go. I don't need this and I don't need that, so I'm going to close those two. And inside my index.html, I'm looking for this h1 tag, which is the location. It's this section right here at the top. Actually, what I'm looking at is the live application online, so I want to open the UI design that we did in the first section. So anyways, I'm looking for this h1 tag at the top. That's where the location is going to be. So I'm going to use document get element by ID, and that one has an ID of location. And next I'm going to a first API request. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call the function, I'm going to make a comment first. I'm going to call it IP info.io API request for location. And so I'm going to say function HTTP request async, and I'm going to pass two parameters. The first one is going to be URL, and the second one is going to be a callback function. I'm going to open and close curly braces, and the reason that is, I mean, you can name your function any way you want, but I'm putting async inside the name of my function to kind of know that the request that I'm making is an asynchronous request. Synchronous request is, I believe, is deprecated by JavaScript. As you know, HTTP is a stateless protocol, and so you make the request, and you have to wait for the request to come back, and so the application needs to move forward with whatever it needs to be doing. So that's what is an asynchronous request. I'm going to say next var HTTP request IP, a new XML capital letter HTTP request. And next I'm going to do HTTP open, and I'm going to specify the request method. In this case, it's going to be a GET request, and I'm going to pass the URL, and the next parameter is through. And next I'm going to say HTTP request IP, and because it is an asynchronous request, I need some sort of property that lets me know, or lets the object know, in this case, when the request is ready. So I'm going. There is a property called onReady state change, and so I'm going to say equals to function. By the way, if I'm mistaken in any of the things that I'm explaining here, please by all means correct me and write your comment. So next I'm going to say if HTTP request IP ready state equals 4 and HTTP request IP status equals 200. You can look up some of these status online, but basically a 200 status means that a delivery was made okay, there was no error, and so we got our page, we got a request, and we can move forward. So next I'm going to say var JSON IP. This is where I'm going to store my JSON object response from the API. So I'm going to say json.parse HTTP request IP response text. And so now I'm ready to start navigating through this JSON IP object. This is where my JSON object is stored. Whatever I request from this service, from this API, I'm going to store it inside this JSON IP. So I'm going to debug to see if I'm successfully obtaining that JSON request from the API. So I'm going to say JSON IP, just like that, and I'm going to save that. Next I'm going to go back into my HTML page, and at the bottom, just right before the body tag, I'm going to say script, and I'm going to remove this from here. I'm going to say source equals to js/weather.js. I'm going to say that I'm going to come down here right after the at the end of this function, this callback function, and I'm going to say http request IP.send. And I noticed that I missed a T right here in request. So finally, I'm going to call the function. So I'm going to say http request async. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to pass the IP URL variable. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to go inside the console, and I'm going to refresh my page, and that is the API and that we want to get. So from here, I'm going to get the location. That is the main information that I want to get, and also I'm going to get the city and country, so I can use it inside the location h1 tag. So what we have to do now is to start assigning variables and navigating the JSON object. So I'm going to, underneath the console log, I'm going to say var IP. I'm going to get the, actually I'm not going to get the IP, I don't need the IP, but I do need the city, and I'm going to say JSON IP dot city, and I also need the country, so I'm going to say JSON IP dot country. I know that because I've already done it, but if you have any doubts how to navigate the JSON object, basically your object, it's what you created. In this case is the JSON IP, is the object that contains the JSON, the whole JSON object. And so if you want to access specific data, you're going to have to access it by the name of the key value pair. If you want to access this string, you're going to have to access it by using the city key name. And so that's what we're doing. And so next I'm going to grab this h1 tag that has a city. Actually, I already got it right here. So I only need to do location inner HTML equals to, I'm going to use ES6 backticks notation, and I'm going to say city, comma, country. Close the backticks, save, and if I refresh my page and everything goes well, I should have this city and this country right here in my h1 tag. So let's see, and here we go, Hialeah US, and so that's working. So next we want to get latitude and longitude. So I'm going to say lat, short for latitude, and I'm going to say JSON IP lat and var long equals to JSON IP long. I believe actually it is not lat. If I go back, it is all inside the location or log keyword. So I'm going to have to say JSON IP log, and that is going to return a string that contains both longitude and latitude. So I'm going to split that string. The string is actually split it by a comma. You see the comma right there in the middle. So I'm going to use that, not the comma. It is a dot. Actually, no, it is a comma. This is a minus symbol. I'm sorry. So I'm going to use the comma to split the string, and for the latitude, I'm going to obtain the first index, or the first value in the array. That's going to return a value. That's going to return an array. And for the second one, I'm going to obtain the second element in the array, which is index 1. And so I'm going to console log again, just to make sure I properly got latitude and longitude. Refresh the page, and that's my latitude and longitude. So I was successfully getting that data. So now I need to make a request with that data to this API. Instead of passing, we need to substitute this latitude and longitude for our latitude and longitude, or instead for the user's latitude and longitude. So that's the only thing that we're missing. So we need to create another HTTP request, in this case to obtain data from the Open Weather Map API. I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to make another comment that says Open Weather Map.org API request. And I'm going to say function. Basically, it is the same thing. This one I'm going to call it HTTP. I'm going to change this one a little bit. I'm going to call this one HTTP IP async. Since it's to a different API, and this one I'm going to call it HTTP request weather async. And I'm going to pass an URL and the callback function, and I'm going to do basically the same thing. So I'm going to say var HTTP request weather equals to new XML HTTP request, and next I'm going to say HTTP request weather dot open. I'm going to get, it's a get request. The next one is going to be the URL, and the third parameter is true. And next I'm going to execute my callback function. So I'm going to say HTTP request weather on ready state change function if HTTP request weather on ready state equals 4, and HTTP request weather status equals 200, then we can proceed. So I'm going to assign it to a JSON object. So I'm going to call it JSON weather, and I'm going to say JSON.parse HTTP request weather response text. And next I'm going to console log the JSON object that we got from the API. So I'm going to say JSON weather, and somewhere down here. Actually, not down here. Outside the callback function, I'm going to say HTTP request weather that send, and of course I need to call that function. So that function is going to be called once this first API request is done. So I'm going to call it right here at the end of the function. So I'm going to say HTTP request weather async, and I'm going to pass I need to pass the URL. I need to pass this URL right here. I'm going to copy it from here, and underneath here I'm going to say var open weather URL, and I'm going to paste it in here. But we need to make a few modifications. One of them, we already have the app ID, so we don't need that. And get rid of that. And we also need to get our own latitude and longitude, so that is a data that is constantly going to be changing. So we're going to get rid of that too, and that's all we need for the weather URL. So somewhere in here, before calling before making the second request, actually right here I'm going to construct the weather API URL. So I'm going to bring it from here, and I'm going to place it here, and I'm going to use backticks so I don't have to escape in and out of the string. And I'm going to say right here latitude equals to lat n long equals to long, and finally n, and I'm going to add the app ID, which is right here. App ID, and that should be it. I'm going to save that, and next I'm going to pass in the URL, but I need to bring it up here. And I'm going to insert weather URL, save that, save again. Now we should be getting back to JSON object. The first one is containing the IP information, and the second one containing the weather information. So let's refresh, and hopefully we didn't get any errors, but now we're not that lucky. Okay, we changed the name of the function, but I forgot to change it here too. So I'm going to say IP, save, run it again, and if I go back into the console, now I have two JSON objects. The first one containing IP and location information, and the second one containing weather data. So we're ready to go. We're ready to start parsing that information and storing it inside our application. So I'm going to come down here, and the first thing I need to obtain is this data here, which is weather description. If you kind of confused what I'm looking at, you just can always go back and reference to the HTML page. This section, it's in the weather body, actually it's in the weather head, and we already got location for H1 tag, this part right here. Next we need to get this section right here, which is description. Inside this section we have an icon, which we need to obtain also, and we have AP tag with ID of description. That's what we need to fill with description. So I'm going to say var description. And how do I get my description? If I expand the weather JSON object inside the main, actually it is inside. Okay, it's inside the weather array, and that has a description key, and that contains the weather description. So that's what I'm looking for. So it is inside the JSON object. Then I have to go to weather, and then inside the first index, because it's an array, the first index, which is index 0, then accessing the description. So that's how you navigate the JSON object. So I'm going to say JSON weather dot weather, and so weather is an array, and index 0 is the one that I want. Inside that I want the description key, and that should be able to give me that. So I'm going to say console log description weather description, and I'm going to say description to see if I was successfully able to grab that information. I'm going to refresh, and it says weather description clear sky. So yes. So I don't need that anymore for now. I'm going to comment it out. And so next I'm going to grab the ID. Notice that the weather description has an ID of 800, and if you're going to open weather map, I mean you have to, depending on the weather application you use, you're gonna have to read a little bit about the documentation. And they have, actually it is not open weather map, it is weather icons. And the weather icon has an ID that corresponds to the weather description. I believe it's somewhere. It's right here on the says popular weather API classes. If you click on this link, it'll take you to some of the famous weather API websites. If I go down to Open Weather Map, which is the one that I'm using, notice that every single class, they have a unique ID number, and that's what identifies the specific icon describing that weather description. So that's what we need, that's what they provide in here. In this section right here, when it says ID, that ID is to describe this specific weather description. So we need to get that. We can get the icon. They also provide an icon which is 01D, but I actually ended up finding out that this icon has a very low resolution. So when I started increasing the font size of the icon, it started losing resolution, and so I ended up using weather icons instead. So I'm going to say var ID, and that was a JSON weather dot weather 0 dot ID. And that is going to give me that. Next, I'm going to say var temperature equals to JSON weather dot main dot temp. We're getting this one from a different part. We're getting this one from the main key, and this is the one that we're looking for, temp. It is 294.7. This is in kelvins, I believe. So we need to use some mathematical formula to convert it into Fahrenheit. So next I'm going to do var temp Fahren. I'm going to say math. I'm going to use the JavaScript math object round, and I'm going to say 1.8 times temperature minus 273 plus 32, and that should be it for the temperature in Fahrenheit. And the temperature is for this section here. You might want to do console log after you get a couple of variables, after you parse a couple of data from the JSON object, to make sure that you're getting the right output. And so before you continue to move, but I've already done it. And so next I'm going to get the humidity, and that I'm going to get it from also the main section, which is this one right here. So I'm going to say var humidity equals to JSON weather main dot humidity, and next I'm going to get the wind speed, and also JSON weather main. Actually, this one is on the different location, I believe. Okay, main. This one is on the wind speed 1.5. So instead of a main, we need to access wind, and then wind, I believe it's wind speed. I know it's only speed, not wind speed. Okay, so next I need to grab, using the document object model, these elements in the page, these two up here and these three down here, so I can set them to these variables. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to say var description, and did I use description already? Yes, it is up here. So I'm going to say desk, and I will say document that get element by ID, and this one has an ID of, this one is the description. Okay, that's description right there, icon, and desk. I'm going to say desk, and next I'm going to say desk.inner HTML, and I'm going to use the div. I'm going to use this div right here, and I'm going to set the icon and the p element at once. That way it makes it easier. So I'm going to change this to description, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to use backticks, and I'm going to say icon ID of icon description, which is this icon here, this icon right here, just the icon with the description. and that is where I'm going to use my the ID that I grab here, which is the ID of the weather description. So I'm going to say dash ID, and I'm going to close the icon, and I'm going to close the closing tag, and next I'm going to open a P tag, and I'm going to say description, which is this variable here, and I'm going to close the P tag and close the backticks, and that is it for the description. I'm going to save that. I'm going to run it. Hopefully this will change, and nope. And I'm going to click on the error, and it's taking me here, and it says inner, I cannot say inner property to null. So I'm going to, the error was the ID, get element by ID, I mistyped description. I'm not going to stop in debugging this too much because this is already getting really long. So I'm going to say description, and I'm going to refresh the page, and now we got the right description, and the icon we still need to fix it, to add the ID to the icon so it gets proper style. So I'm going to say icon description, I believe is the ID. Icon description, yes. I'm going to save that, refresh, and I was able to fix the icon. I was missing the we class. I was using only the we own plus the ID, and so now I need to fix the clear sky description, which I need to add an ID of description. All of this is inside the index HTML page. Save, refresh, and that is it. Next I'm going to move into temperature, which has a property of temperature, and the icon, it's right here. So I'm going to grab that. Next I'm going to say var temperature. I'm just going to leave it at temp since already temperature exists. So document get element by ID temperature, and next I'm going to say temp dot inner HTML, and I'm going to use backticks and temperature followed by the icon, which has an ID of icon thermometer, in the class of we thermometer, and I'm going to close that icon and close backticks, save and refresh, and of course it seems that our calculation with the temperature were not exactly correct. I'm sorry, what happens is that I'm using temperature instead of the conversion, which is temp foreign. It's been a long tutorial, and it reaches the time where you just want to finish. So I'm going to say temp foreign, and I'm going to refresh the page, and that is about right. So we only need these three, and that is it. Bear with me here for a second as we rush through this last section. So next I'm going to say var humidity. I'm going to call this humidity element. Document that get element by ID, and that one is humidity. Next, humidity inner HTML, and I'm going to set that one to humidity. Yes, and for the percentage, because it has a percentage. And next I'm going to get the wind, so I'm going to say bar wind element document get element by ID wind, and wind element in HTML equals to wind speed. And finally I'm going to get the visibility element document get element by ID, and that one I don't know if I changed it. Yes, I need to change this one to, actually this one doesn't have an ID, so actually say here this one is visibility, and visibility element inner HTML equals to visibility, and that should be it. I'm going to save it, refresh, and this visibility, which I need to change. This is not actually visibility. Able to properly display visibility. I'm not even going to make the conversion. I'm not sure. I know that this probably is miles in which you can see, you can clearly see, but I'm sure not how to convert this. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and as always, remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.